You know, he signed the U.S. Constitution, he served right alongside George Washington, and he even helped create the Electoral College. So, why have so few of us ever heard of him? Today, we're pulling back the curtain on the story of a founder who helped shape America from the shadows.
When you think of the Founding Fathers, who pops into your head? Washington, right? Jefferson, Madison, the big names. They were the giants, the incredible orators, the famous writers. But here's the thing, a nation isn't built only by the loudest voices in the room.
So let's meet one of those crucial, quieter figures, Nicholas Gilman, a delegate from New Hampshire. He wasn't the guy giving the fiery speeches, but believe me, his impact on the actual machinery of the American government was absolutely profound. To really understand Nicholas, we first have to get to know his family. This wasn't a guy who just stumbled into the revolution. He was born right into the very heart of it. The Gilmans of Exeter, New Hampshire were basically a local dynasty of public service and revolutionary spirit.
See, the Gilmans had a reputation. They were known all over as dynamic leaders, but also for something incredibly practical. They had a real head for figures. And for a revolution fueled by little more than sheer hope, managing the money was every bit as crucial as winning the battles.
Just take Nicholas's father, for example. He wasn't just in the revolution, he was its financial engine in New Hampshire. As state treasurer, his home literally became the treasury. It's no surprise they called him the brains of the revolution in the state. He was the man who kept the entire enterprise from going broke.
But the Revolutionary War was also a civil war, and it split communities and even families right down the middle. Nicholas's own granduncle, Peter Gilman, was a loyalist who stayed faithful to the British crown. So while his nephew was busy funding the rebellion, Peter was basically under house arrest in his own town. Can you just imagine the tension in that family?
So growing up in this environment of revolutionary finance and family division, Nicholas Gilman started to forge his own path, one that would take him from the battlefield to the very halls of power that he was fighting to create.
And he didn't just rely on his family name, not at all. At just 20 years old, he enlisted in the Army. Within 3 years, he was on General Washington's own staff. He was at Yorktown, counting prisoners at the final surrender. He left the Army a decorated captain and just 3 years later was elected to the Continental Congress. It was a meteoric rise, and it proved his credentials were absolutely unimpeachable.
And all that service led him right to Philadelphia in 1787 for the Constitutional Convention. This is where our quiet founder would make his most lasting mark, but maybe not in the way you might think.
So what was he like in person? Well, a fellow delegate, a guy named William Pierce, described him pretty simply as modest, genteel, and sensible. He wasn't a showman. He wasn't there for the spotlight. He was there to get the work done. And that's the really fascinating paradox of Nicholas Gilman. He was known for being silent during a lot of the main discussions, but behind the scenes, his contribution was absolutely essential to breaking one of the biggest deadlocks of the entire convention. This is where he made his move. Gilman was placed on the Committee on Postponed Matters. You can think of it as the convention's fix-it crew, a group that included James Madison, tasked with solving the toughest problems. And their biggest problem? How to elect a president? The solution they landed on, with Gilman's input, was the Electoral College. Gilman totally understood the gravity of what they were doing. In a letter home, he wrote that the fate of the nation depended on adopting this new constitution, warning that failure would mean being torn to pieces by intestine commotions. He saw this document, this product of compromise, as the only real path forward.
And for Gilman, signing the Constitution wasn't the end of his work. Really, it was just the beginning. He dedicated the rest of his life to making the government he helped create actually function.
His political journey after the convention is really fascinating. He started as a Federalist, serving 8 years in the House, but he wasn't rigid. By 1802, his views had evolved and he began identifying as a Jeffersonian Republican. This pragmatism, the ability to change his mind, is such a key part of his character. He was then elected to the Senate in 1804, where he served for the rest of his life.
He died in 1814 at the age of just 58 while traveling home from Washington, D.C. He was still a sitting U.S. Senator, a public servant to the very end. His life wasn't long, but it was absolutely packed with service to the new nation.
So what can we take away from the life of a founder like Nicholas Gilman? What does his story tell us about how history is really made?
His legacy isn't one of soaring rhetoric, but of diligent, practical work. He represents the committee members, the financial managers, the quiet compromisers who are absolutely essential for any great endeavor. They're the ones who turn grand ideas into a functioning reality.
So, by all means, let's celebrate the orators and the generals. But the story of Nicholas Gilman reminds us to look deeper and ask a crucial question. How much of our world was built not by the loudest voices, but by the sensible, modest, and quiet work of people whose names we may never even know?